All right, thank you very much. That concludes this round of presentations. I'd like to thank all of our presenters for joining us today. Your comments were very insightful, and I'm sure the committee will have a lot to deliberate. You may step down at this time. I'd like to welcome our new participants to our public hearings here today. Before we begin, I'd just like to do a quick roll call. Do we have Miranda Deza here from Last Chance for Animals? Yes, thank you. And then for Canadian Coalition for Farm Animals, do we have Maureen Bogue? If you are here, please raise your hand or say yes if you're on the phone. Susan Cleland? Vicky, sorry, was that Susan? Susan's here. Vicky Facto, I see Vicky there. Anne Griffin? Yes, okay, thank you. And for Animal Justice, Camille Labchuk? Yes, there we go. Thank you. So we'll begin this round of presentations with Miranda Deza. Please state your name for the record, and you have 7 minutes. You may begin.
Good morning. I'm Miranda Deza, Canadian Council for Last Chance for Animals, or LCA, a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating animal exploitation through education, whistleblowing, legislation, and media attention. LCA has been involved in a number of high-profile whistleblower exposés in Canada, which have led to numerous charges based on the treatment of animals and legislative change. I'm here today to discuss three things. First, our concerns with the phrase false pretenses in Bill 156. Second, the importance of whistleblowing. And third, the results of recent polling we completed about Bill 156. Bill 156 will impose animal protection zones on farms, meat processing plants, and other prescribed areas, and require consent for entry into these areas. The bill will impose fines up to $25,000 where consent is obtained on false pretenses, requiring anyone who intends to gather information to whistleblow about hygiene and safety, the treatment of animals, or environmental issues to get consent in advance to collect this information. This will criminalize whistleblower exposés into our food chain and severely punish whistleblowers acting in society's best interest. The bill will make it a crime to reveal the truth. Bill 156 would capture even established employees who decide to gather evidence to shed light on issues observed in the course of their employment. This is a severe erosion in oversight and transparency and an unjustified intrusion on freedom of expression. Whistleblowers are an essential part of our legal system regulating animal agriculture. The government should be celebrating whistleblowers and the important role they play in oversight and transparency. There are no inspections in Ontario aimed at regulating the treatment of farm animals. Farm animal welfare is policed primarily on the basis of complaints. Under the PAWS Act, there is the possibility of inspections, but no schedule or details. Plus, that's not enough. Remember when the government told us it was going to have inspections into homes for the aged? Look at how that turned out. In 2018, LCA's whistleblower expose at Millbank Fur Farm led to 14 charges being laid for animal cruelty, including sanitation issues. To help you understand the value of whistleblowers, we have put together a video showing conditions that have been exposed in recent Ontario whistleblower exposés and submitted it to the clerk and posted it in a press release today at stopontarioaggagbill.com. In spite of the marvels of modern technology, the committee won't let us show it here today, which is a real shame because it is impossible to put into words what these videos show. I warn you that the video is graphic, but I urge you to watch the video. and pay attention to the cruel conditions, the unsanitary premises, the crowding, and the untreated wounds. I urge you to listen to the cries of the animals and ask if that is in line with how you believe animals should be treated in Ontario. I urge you to ask yourselves if covering this up is in the best interests of society. The current pandemic has shown us that there is a strong connection between the sanitary treatment of animals and disease. Now is not the time to shut down whistleblowing in Ontario. We need it now more than ever. Ontarians want to know about where their food comes from and how animals raised for food are treated. We know this because we retained campaign research to complete a poll among a sample of 1,042 Ontarians about whistleblowing and Bill 156. The study was conducted on June 2nd and 4th, 2020. The study showed us that 87% of Ontarians agree that animals raised for food should be treated as humanely as possible. 91% of Ontarians believe that oversight and transparency into the conditions for animals on farms is important. 88% of Ontarians believe that it is important for whistleblowers to be able to expose conditions for animals, as well as hygiene and food safety on farms and in meat processing plants. 84% of Ontarians believe that there should be public transparency into health concerns in meat processing plants. The poll showed us that 61% of decided Ontarians disagree with Bill 156 making undercover investigations into the condition of farms and meat processing plants under false pretenses illegal. It also
You have
showed
1 minute left.
that 77% of decided Ontarians agreed that outlawing undercover investigations interferes with free speech. The results of the poll are quite compelling and show that Ontarians place high value in whistleblowers, oversight, and transparency. And while I do not have time to review all the results here, I urge you to review them in detail. I've submitted a complete copy of the polling results with the clerk, and the contents of our poll have been published in today's Sun. I urge you, there is still time to revisit Bill 156 and remove the false pretenses language. And if you don't, I urge you to at least change the name from the Protection Against Trespass and Food Security Act to the more appropriately named the Animal Abuse Whistleblower Trampling Act.
Thank you,
I
Ms.
thank you
Deza.
for your time.
That's all the time we have for your presentation. We'll now turn to our next group of presenters. Can we please unmute everyone here who is here on behalf of Canadian Coalition for Farm Animals? I would ask that if you could all please state your names for the record, and you will have 7 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
I'm Vicky Fecteau.
I'm Anne Griffin.
I'm Maureen Bogue.
And I'm Susan Cleland.
You may begin. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting us to attend this committee meeting. My name is Susan Cleland. I'm a director at the Canadian Coalition for Farm Animals, and I'm joined today by fellow directors Maureen Bogue, Vicky Fecteau, and Anne Griffin. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the welfare of animals raised for food in Canada. Crystal McKay, Executive Director of the Guelph-based advocacy group Farm and Food Care Canada, that launched the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, said, "There are 16 million Canadians with a question mark about our food system." Most Canadians, including those in the southwestern Ontario Farm Belt, are a generation or more removed from direct farm experience, but many said they worry about whether farm animals are treated humanely. A Canada-wide study in 2018 by the same group, the Canadian Centre for Food Integrity, suggests there is increasing uncertainty about the direction of our food system. For the first time since the surveys have been done, results show a failing impression of Canada's agriculture system, with rising concerns around animal welfare as a whole. When it comes to consumers' confidence that Canadian meat, milk, and eggs are raised humanely, 61% of respondents were unsure. I hope that you have read the document we emailed in March regarding our issues with the proposed bill. To summarize, number one, it is not clear to us why this bill is required at all. Although some NPPs have said farmers have nothing to hide, there is no question they do. Number two, there are already trespassing laws in place, and a property owner can make a citizen's arrest of a trespasser. Number three, some aspects of the bill are not clearly defined, such as interacting with an animal and animal protection zones. Our main concern, though, is how animal abuse will be exposed. It will be almost impossible for employees to record abuse. An employee of a farm or slaughterhouse could be considered to have obtained consent under false pretenses and could be arrested by the owner if he or she is suspected of being a whistleblower. Bill 156 seems to have been written solely for the benefit of animal agriculture in order to hide practices in factory farms, transport trucks, and slaughter facilities. However, animal agriculture should not be exempt from consumer oversight any more than any other industry. The very fact that animal agriculture is pushing for this law does not suggest they're trying to protect animals. Rather, it is clearly proving that they have something to hide. It is also critical that consumers, many of whom advocate for animals, be completely aware of how farm animals are treated in the animal agriculture industry. This is made possible through whistleblowers in the same way such oversight exists in other industries. Just recently, the Canadian military were brought into Ontario to help seniors in the long-term care homes, and they reported about the absolutely squalid conditions. Just imagine if the Ontario government enacted laws to silence these whistleblowers. There are so many parallels here involving beings who are the most vulnerable in our society, unable to speak out against those who are in charge of supposedly caring for them. As I mentioned earlier, the document that we submitted contains links to several undercover investigations done in Ontario. They depict scenes of extreme violence, which of course are not within the codes of practice. They are hard to watch, but they must be seen. The first investigation was at Hybrid Turkeys, where footage showed a worker brutally killing a turkey with a variety of objects, including a shovel. Needlessly, the bird was in a tremendous amount of pain. There were also reports of punching, kicking, and throwing turkeys. Their spines crushed, heads bashed in, one bird left to drag its exposed intestines across the dirty ground. The third video was recorded at Maple Lodge Farms near Brampton. Chickens can arrive dead from transportation in extreme heat or cold. They are roughly thrown onto a conveyor belt, then shackled by their legs, some with broken bones protruding from their bodies. They then may survive the stunning pool and have their throats cut while still conscious. Sometimes they miss the cutting knife and an employee attempts to cut its throat by hand. The employee can process 1,000 or 2,000 birds per day. A fourth video at a halal slaughterhouse shows many of the same conditions as Maple Lodge Farms. There are also additional links to undercover investigations in other provinces that were precedent-setting. An example is footage from a Manitoba pig farm, which resulted in the National Farm Animal Care Council introducing a new code of practice which bans the use of gestation crates in Canada. Another from a Chilliwack, BC dairy farm, which resulted in the first time in Canada, a company being held responsible for the acts of cruelty committed by its employees. With the realities of the vast amount of inhumane farming practices, whistleblowers are clearly needed. It is only through their actions that cruel practices have been uncovered and regulatory changes have been made to protect animals. Whistleblowers are truly working to protect and safeguard these animals and put in place protections.
You have
to make
1
their
minute
lives
left
better.
for your presentation.
Thank you. There are more than 26,000 livestock farms in Ontario, 150 slaughterhouses, and 27 livestock auctions. The recently enacted Provincial Animal Welfare Services PAWS inspectors cannot possibly investigate all of these facilities in addition to other investigations of zoos, aquariums, and domestic companion animals. There is no doubt that this bill has several flaws and should be amended or withdrawn. Thank you for listening to our concerns.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to Camille Labchuk, who's here on behalf of Animal Justice. Please state your name for the record, and you will have 7 minutes for your presentation. You may begin.
Thank you and good morning. I'm a lawyer and the Executive Director of Animal Justice. My name is Camille Labchuk. We are Canada's only animal law advocacy organization, representing tens of thousands of Canadians, and we work to improve laws protecting animals. Unfortunately, there's a lot to do because Canada has some of the worst animal protection laws in the Western world. And Bill 156 is about to make a bad situation far worse. This bill is what's known as an egg gag law, which attacks whistleblowers and prevents them from exposing illegal and unethical practices on farms. This is pure protectionism for the farm industry, and it's inspired by similar laws in the US that never should have crept into Canada. Here's what's at stake. Last year in this country, we killed 834 million chickens, pigs, cows, and other animals for food. What they endure is far beyond our worst nightmares. They spend their lives in deplorable conditions, mostly in dark, windowless warehouses. The farming industry treats them like commodities instead of sentient animals who feel both physical and mental anguish. Standard farming practices include things like castration, debeaking, cutting off tails without anesthesia, confining hens in battery cages so small they can't spread their wings, chaining calves to veal crates, and keeping mother pigs in gestation crates that prevent them from even turning around. I know you're going to hear from farm commodity groups who will boast about their very high standards of animal care, but this is false. Canada doesn't even regulate or monitor animal welfare on farms. Standard farming practices are exempt from provincial animal protection laws like the PAWS Act, so farmers get to make up their own rules through this massive loophole. The fox is guarding the henhouse. When the public does see the truth, most of the time that's because a whistleblower takes photos or videos. Shocking videos shot by whistleblowing employees have resulted in hundreds of news stories and aired on high-profile shows like CTV National News, Marketplace, and W5. These investigative stories have led to animal cruelty prosecutions and convictions and policy changes. But the bill would effectively shut down those hidden camera videos. Under Section 4.6, it would be illegal for someone to gain access to a facility through a false pretense. This would include an employee who seeks a job on a farm, follows all the rules, but didn't disclose that they care about animals and intend to blow the whistle if they see illegal cruelty. This would include investigative journalists. And this would include a worker whose employment agreement says they won't film inside the farm. If that person still sees something so disturbing they feel they have to go public, they would be punished. Now, this isn't only about animal cruelty. This also goes for workplace safety violations. Canada's biggest COVID infections have all been in slaughterhouses, and slaughter workers are terrified to go to work. Some of them have died. Under 156, a person who exposes those unsafe workplace conditions or takes a photo of inadequate protective gear could be prosecuted and fined. The bill attacks whistleblowers who expose criminal conduct in the workplace. The bill also attacks people who expose animal cruelty during transport, and you heard from Anita Crimes, who does vigils outside slaughterhouses. They frequently document violations of animal transport laws, and I know this because I help them file complaints with authorities. Inspectors are seldom watching and even more rarely prosecute, even when animals are overheating, when they arrive frozen solid as hockey pucks at the slaughterhouse, or when they suffer injuries from overcrowding. Citizen complaints are essential, and the provisions in Section 5.2 of this bill that prevent people from gathering outside slaughterhouses and interacting with animals on transport trucks, those would further reduce oversight and stop people from seeing suffering inside those trucks. These aspects of Bill 156 are also clearly unconstitutional. Egg gag laws are a U.S. import. Farmers have pushed for these draconian laws, typically after undercover footage exposes cruelty that farm lobby groups don't want people to see. When they do pass, egg gag laws in the U.S. have been repeatedly struck down in court as unconstitutional, including in Idaho, Utah, Iowa, and Kansas. And the reason for this is because they restrict freedom of speech, which is one of our most cherished rights in a democracy. Over 40 Canadian legal experts have already written to tell the government that Bill 156 is unconstitutional too because it attacks our chartered protected right to free expression. You'll hear from some of those experts, and I'll leave it to them to elaborate. The government says this bill is about biosecurity on farms and stopping trespass, but it's not. Trespassing is already an offense. If the government wants higher fines to deter concerned citizens from trespassing on farms to see those conditions for themselves, that could be done without targeting employee whistleblowers. The bill isn't about biosecurity either. The government has never once explained how a whistleblowing employee could pose any risk whatsoever to biosecurity, because this is someone who's legally employed at the farm, follows all the rules, and simply films illegal cruelty if they see it. There's no risk, and not a single US court has accepted the biosecurity argument because it's not a legitimate concern. The bill actually makes biosecurity worse by preventing whistleblowers from exposing conditions that could lead to public health threats, like viruses or antibiotic-resistant superbugs. I remind you that COVID-19 emerged from a wildlife market in China, but that a deadly virus could just as easily have come from a factory farm in North America. And they have. Strains of swine flu and bird flu already have. Deadly strains. Warehousing thousands of genetically similar animals in filthy conditions creates an ideal breeding ground for pathogens. Animal farming needs more transparency, not less. This bill is a huge step backwards, and the unconstitutional aspects of it will inevitably be challenged and lose in court. We've seen this movie before. The lengthy court battle will waste taxpayer funds at a time when we're going further into debt to respond
You have
to the
1 minute
pandemic.
left.
Thank you. The law will be struck down and whistleblowers' exposés will once again be legal. But in the meantime, the court case will be a constant reminder of the abject cruelty and suffering that the farm industry is desperate to hide. I want to close by reminding you that Animal Justice testified in support of the New Paws Act a year before this, last year before a committee just like this one. And government MPPs quoted me on the floor of the legislature praising the Paws Act in debates. The animal protection community and Animal Justice is more than willing to engage and work with the government. But this is the first chance I've had to sit face to face with anyone in the government despite multiple meeting requests about this bill. Instead, it's the farm industry's fingerprints that are all over 156. But your job as legislators is not simply to protect the profits of farmers. It's your job to protect vulnerable members of society, and this absolutely includes farm animals. Please prioritize animals, transparency in the food system, and public health. Please reject
Thank
this
you.
dangerous bill,
That's
or at least
all the
remove the
time that we.
unconstitutional.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. You are able to comment further through questions. This round of questioning will begin with the Independent Green Party member, MPP Schreiner. You have 6.5 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to thank all three groups of presenters for taking the time to come to committee today and speak out. I'm going to direct my first question to Camille from Animal Justice. You've mentioned the fact that this type of legislation has been struck down as unconstitutional in many states in the U.S. Do you anticipate a charter challenge to Bill 156? And do you think that challenge would be successful?
I think it's inevitable that there will be a charter challenge to Bill 156. I think that the stakes are too high to let this legislation stand, and that in a liberal democracy, we simply can't sit back and abide by unconstitutional legislation. What's at stake here, as I've explained, is the ability of the public to get a glimpse behind the closed doors of factory farms. In Canada, we have rights to freedom of expression, and that includes not just the right to gather and disseminate information, but the right to receive that information as well. And this bill deprives Canadians from very important information that helps them make decisions about food and their food choices. When people see cruelty that happens on farms, that gives them information they need to decide whether they want to continue consuming those products. When a slaughterhouse is exposed for botched killings and abject cruelty on the floor of the slaughterhouse, that gives citizens and consumers the ability to say, I'm not going to patronize that establishment anymore. And when that information is shut off by a bill like 156 that does a real disservice to whistleblowers and the public, I don't think there's any response but to challenge it. And I do anticipate that challenge will be successful. Every single time this type of legislation has been passed in the States, challenges have been filed and they have all succeeded there. You'll hear from constitutional and criminal law experts who are far smarter than I am. These are people who are professors at Canada's leading law schools who believe that Bill 156 is unconstitutional and will be struck down in court.
Thank you for the response. My next question is going to be to Miranda. I was very interested in your polling numbers. And I asked this question as somebody who actually grew up on a farm, and we raised cattle on our farm. And one of the concerns I've had with this bill is in the US, when this type of legislation has been struck down by the courts, it's actually undermined confidence in farming. And actually, consumers have become more wary of supporting local farmers. Do you think that concern is reflected in your polling that you've recently done?
I think that that is a very, very valid concern. The results of our poll talk a lot about how people want and expect this information. And our poll didn't ask questions specifically about that, but I am aware of other polling information that has addressed that information. And I actually believe you're going to be hearing from the people who commissioned that poll. But when people find out that farms are not being, that agriculture farms are affecting the flow of information out of the farms, it actually makes people more concerned about animal welfare and abolishes and harms trust in farmers, affecting their relationships. So that affects the farmers. And in fact, there are examples of US farmers who have asked for ag gags to be removed so that they can increase their reputation and have better respect from the community. Because laws like this only protect a few bad apples. And they protect them from things they shouldn't be protected for, because oversight and transparency are essential to our democratic governance. And we obtained a number of polling numbers that tell us about all of the things that are important. And what's really interesting is that our cause polled well across all political spectrums. So people who support all of the political parties in Ontario believe that this oversight and transparency are essential. And this law, will not help farmers. It will harm them.
Okay, thank you for that. Just really quick, I think my time is probably running out, but I'm just going to ask Camille, do you have some ways in which you think this bill could be amended to address the constitutional charter concerns that people would have?
Yes, I do. I think the biggest problems with this legislation are found in Section 4 and Section 5. So Section 4, Sub 4 says it's an offense to interact or interfere with an animal in an animal protection zone on a farm. That could be a very clear constitutional right. Say
You
that
have
there's
1 minute left.
a fence delineating a farm, there's animals on one side, and a neighbor or an animal advocate goes to interact or film those animals. That could capture that conduct. The provision, Section 4, Sub 6, which prohibits people from gaining access to a farm via false pretense, that's a clear restraint on speech and unconstitutional and should be deleted. Section 5, Sub 2, which prohibits interacting or interfering with an animal in a transport truck, is constitutionally problematic. And any reference to false pretenses in the bill is something that restrains speech, and I believe would be struck down by court. And so that would be something on our list of a high priority to be deleted.
Great. And I was going to ask the Canadian Coalition for Farm Animals a question, but I think I'm probably run out of time. So I'll just thank you for coming to committee.
Thank you. You had about 4 seconds left there. We're going to now turn to the government side, and I see a number of raised hands. Who would like to begin? MPP Barrett, I see your hand. You may begin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I appreciate you letting me know that some of my other colleagues have some questions. And I thank the people at the the witness table and the discussion issues raised around whistleblowing and false pretenses and the issue of getting permission ahead of time to go on somebody's property. And as we know, during these deliberations on committee, this proposed legislation does establish, if it passes, would establish additional offenses to address some of these issues. For example, entering somebody's property without explicit prior consent would be an offense. And also, if somebody were to go on someone's property, but they give false ID or misleading information with respect to who they actually are, and I think of and again, we have government for a reason, and we have inspectors and people who work for government, and my understanding, when they do come to somebody's property or come to the door, that oftentimes they have a uniform or they have an easily identified vehicle. It may say OPP, it may say Ontario government, it may be municipal bylaw. But and this must go back for many years. They would identify who they are, and they would ask permission if they can go and, I don't know, inspect the footings of a building that's being constructed. But from what I hear in the testimony, I hear arguments against that. And I'm not a lawyer. I mean, I guess we've had the British common law for, I don't know, developed over 800 years or so. And my understanding is you don't go on someone's property without asking permission. It can be dangerous, especially in the evening when it's dark, for all sides, or for animals for that matter, or children that are around. And you don't lie to somebody when you go on someone's property and say that you're an undercover policeman or something like that. So again, could we just run through that again? What's the rationale to justify going on somebody's property with misleading ID or without having permission? I just want to get my head around that.
MPP Barrett, who is that question directed towards?
Oh, again, well, I know Miranda raised it at the beginning. I think I saw Camille's hand go up.
Camille?
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. I'm happy to speak to that. And thanks for the question, because I think it does give us an opportunity to really clarify what we're talking about here. My concern on behalf of animal justice is not that there are people out there who are using fake police badges to try to go onto property, or that they're coming on at night and that's inappropriate. We do have trespass laws in Ontario that say you can't come onto someone else's property, and so that already exists. What I think is new about this legislation that's really troubling, it's not that it will necessarily crack down on someone who pretends they're a police officer. I think the concern is that if somebody is legitimately employed in a food processing plant, like a slaughterhouse, or legitimately employed on a factory farm, but they didn't disclose when they got that job that they care about animals and they might film cruelty and expose it if they see it, that's what the bill would consider to be a false pretense. So this person, legitimately employed, carrying out all their duties as instructed, but simply filming animal cruelty if they see it, and then becoming a whistleblower, that's the type of person that we're concerned about. You could also have somebody who didn't have any intentions of filming anything when they got the job, but they started working on the farm, or let's say there's a slaughterhouse and they see botched slaughter after botched slaughter and the management isn't taking any action, and they get concerned about the implications of this. And that person has maybe signed an employment agreement that has an NDA that says they can't film inside their workplace. If they take those videos and expose them, even if they reveal illegal cruelty, that's what the false pretenses provision could attack. And that type of person who's trying to act in the public interest and reveal cruelty or unsafe work conditions, or conditions that could lead to viruses, that's the kind of person who could be covered and punished by that. And we don't think that's right.
Okay, thank you. I think one of my colleagues has a question. Thanks, Chair.
Do I see any raised hands from the government? MPP Smith?
Thank you very much for that. My question is for Miranda. I understand your organization has lobbied the federal government to deny COVID-19 relief funds to some farms here in Ontario. Most of those funds will be used for PPE. Don't you think it's important that those farm workers have access to PPE as well?
We put in a request and asked about specific future funding and that it would prioritize farmers who were farming for agriculture, for a transition to sustainable agriculture.
So some farmers shouldn't get PPE?
Certainly, I would never suggest that people should not have PPE.
But you were just asking the federal government not to give them funds through COVID-19 relief, and those funds would be used for PPE for those workers. So how do you align that? It seems incongruent when you're saying on one hand that the federal government shouldn't be giving any funds to some of these farmers, and yet you're also saying that these workers do need access to PPE, especially during COVID-19. So how do you align the two then when you're saying that, no, the federal government shouldn't give these farms money, and you're also saying that, yes, you absolutely believe that the people who work in those farms deserve to have protections on these things? Where's the alignment on it?
Well, in terms of the funding, our letter came after the funding that was released for PPE and was with respect to additional funding. We're also asking that funding not be provided to large agricultural factory farms and that funding prioritize smaller farmers transitioning into more sustainable practices.
So larger farms don't have anyone working there?
You have 1 minute
they
left.
They don't need any of that PPE?
In terms of funding, there is a large need. We were asking for prioritization of smaller farms with less resources and abilities. Many of the farms out there are large, massive corporations who have access to significant resources and who should be expected to provide these things to their employees, as all other employers are required to provide PPE out of their own pocket.
So some workers are worthy and others aren't. I'll turn it over to another one of my MPP colleagues.
MPP Harris, you have 20 seconds for this round.
I think
You'll wait for the next round?
Next round, thank you.
Probably a wise choice there. We'll now turn to the official opposition. Who would like to begin? MPP Vanthof, I see your hand. You have 8 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the presenters. I might be in conflict of interest. I was a dairy farmer most of my life, proud of it. But you bring up all three groups brought up an interesting issue, because in the legislature, when I talk to farm groups, it's all about the first part of the act, about the increasing to trespassing, the increase of the fines, and very little about the whistleblower part of the act. And specifically, very little in what I'm trying to explain to them, and hopefully you can do it again, that actually for the farmers and the farm groups who are doing everything right, this potential overreach by the government, and it's possibly be struck down, could actually hurt farmers. The farmers are doing it right, and the vast majority could actually hurt them in the long run. Could you perhaps Camille, Chair, through you to Camille, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Vanthof, for that question and comment. And thank you for what you've done to attempt to explain it to farmers, because we've experienced the same thing. I think the way the bill is communicated about, especially by the government, is in terms of protecting private property and protecting biosecurity. So it's about trespass and health of animals on farms, but this sneaky provision involving prohibiting people from using false pretenses to gain access isn't something that I don't think a lot of people truly appreciate or have knowledge of. So I think you're right that this bill actually does a disservice to farmers. Here's what's going to happen. The bill is going to be challenged in court. We know exactly how these cases are going to play out because they have in the States over the course of the last decade or so. Every time there's an appearance in that court case, the issue goes back into the news, and television stations play footage of undercover investigations that have shown those bad apple farmers that have shown stuff that's untoward happening to animals on farms. And the entire farm industry gets tarred with that brush. And so I know that by the end of litigation in many of the USA gig states, farmers were actually begging the government to give up the fight, to stop, because it was so bad for their reputations that these issues kept getting raised in the news. So I'm concerned that the bill has been spoken of exclusively about trespass and biosecurity, and a lot of farmers don't even appreciate the negative effects that this would have on them.
Thank you very much. And one other issue, I don't know who to direct this at, so I'll, if this bill passes as it stands, and if it's effective as it stands, likely the only inspection or the only supervision will ever be government or industry of the system. And would this clause stand in the Long-Term Care Act after what we've seen in long-term care? Would this, it's crazy that it's crazy that we're actually discussing this during a pandemic, but would a similar clause, or does a similar clause like that, does it exist in any act in Ontario?
Not that I'm aware of. What we've seen, the only similar thing is in Alberta. Alberta passed egg-to-gig legislation just before the Ontario bill was introduced, and it covers all situations. It would cover nursing homes, daycare facilities, hospitals, other locations where vulnerable people are being kept, and that's obviously a huge concern for that province. But here we're singling out farms for this type of secrecy. And I think you're absolutely right that the public wouldn't stand for this in nursing homes. They wouldn't stand for this in daycares. They wouldn't stand for this in schoolyards. And the question is, why are we treating farms so differently from these other locations where there are vulnerable people? And, I think to your point that we're currently in the midst of a horrific crisis in long-term care homes. I know we've all read the news stories, and we're all aware at this point of how we failed senior citizens who live there. And one of those reasons we failed them is for a lack of government oversight. That lack of government oversight is exactly what we're seeing on farms. There's no inspectors who are there to look for animal welfare concerns because there's no regulations that they can enforce. So I would suggest that a better response to the situation, if there's concern over people trespassing on farms, the reason they're trespassing on farms is because they have lost confidence. There's a crisis of legitimacy in the way the public perceives farming because it's not regulated. I would suggest that a better approach, instead of trying to silence protests and whistleblowers, is to tackle the root of the problem and address those lack of animal welfare standards on farms and address the lack of oversight and publicly available information so that people don't have to go in with a hidden camera and get that information themselves.
Thank you. Maureen, would you like to respond? Sorry, Ms. Bogue, your microphone is on mute. You'll have to unmute yourself on your end, I believe.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we talk about the COVID-19 right now and what's going in the long-term home care facilities and how these are the most vulnerable, like animals are, and how we should be treating being more concerned about animals too, ones who can't speak for themselves. And I just want to draw attention to the past. There was a time when children should be seen but not heard. And then when I was young, in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of cases of child physical and sexual abuse. And it was brushed under the carpet because they thought it would be too traumatic for children to appear in a court. And actually it happened to me. And it traumatized me and had an effect on my entire life. And then when I had my children, I thought, this isn't going to happen to my children, to that generation. And now since then, people have come forward and they've blown whistles on people like that Gordon Stuckless, the incident that happened. So we have changed our laws. We've made it easier for children to appear in court. So again, these are the most vulnerable. And if it wasn't for the whistleblowers, if it wasn't for the people like me that thought this isn't right, my children aren't going to go through this, and then the generations after them
There's 1 minute left for this round.
Okay, that's all I wanted to say. I just think that ties in with the long-term care homes and the vulnerability of the seniors, children, and animals, and how whistleblowing has made a difference.
I would just like to make one comment before my time is over on this round, that of all the farmers I know, and the vast majority do a good job. I'm anecdotally, but in every sector there, and the premier said a couple days in question period, every profession has some bad apples, and those are the ones that, and I would hate to damage the reputation of all the good farmers by trying to protect a few of those bad apples.
Thank you, MPP Vanthof. There is about 11 seconds left. I think we can safely say that's the end of this round. So because we have a hard stop at noon, what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the government side and then official opposition, and each side will only have 4 minutes. So MPP Harris, you may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here virtually today. Like I said to the first group of presenters, these are unprecedented times, and it's kind of neat that we're able to meet in this way and get everybody's opinions heard. I just wanted to touch quickly on something that we haven't really talked much about yet in the first couple of hours of deputations here, and that's biosecurity. I have the opportunity to represent a very unique riding, where it's about 60% rural and about 40% urban. In Waterloo Region, that riding is Kitchener-Conestoga. And we have about 1,400 farms, working registered farms within Waterloo Region. And I would venture to say that probably over 1,000 of them are within my riding. And I've had a wonderful opportunity to get out and meet a lot of these local farmers, and some of them are larger operations, and some are sort of very small, almost hobby farms. But everybody that I've had the opportunity to get out and meet with, has really shown that they care very much about their animals and the things that are happening on their farms. And just to move into this biosecurity aspect of things a little bit here, when I go to some of the larger either processing facilities and or some of the larger farms, there's often an inspector on site, whether that be a provincial inspector or whether that be an inspector from the federal Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And I know that the member from Temiskaming Cochrane has probably come in contact with these folks through his day-to-day operations back when he was still farming on a pretty regular basis. But you're wearing lab coats, you're wearing booties, sometimes you're wearing gloves, hair nets, beard nets, etc. And I wonder, maybe Susan, I don't think you've had a chance to really have too much say in the conversation. So maybe I'll put this question to you. Farmers and food processors take meticulous care into providing biosecurity for our supply chain when it comes to food here in the province of Ontario and of course Canada. And I'm just wondering, through the action that your organization has taken over the years, whether or not people that are trespassing onto farms understand the risk that could pose to potential biosecurity measures.
Absolutely. And we at Canadian Coalition for Farm Animals absolutely do not condone trespassing onto private property. But what we are pushing for is allowing whistleblowers, when they see something, to say something. And I'd actually like to turn it over to my
There's
colleagues.
1 minute left.
Okay, I was wondering, Vicki, if you could comment on this?
Yes. As Susan said, we're not condoning trespassing at all, but someone who legitimately gets a job on a farm and goes through the training process and has all of the right equipment and clothing and so on would not be a risk, a biosecurity risk, any more than a regular employee would be.
So Vicki, just to clarify, you don't support trespassing on private property, is what you just said. Is that true?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And
But there are already trespassing laws. What we support is somebody who legitimately gets a job on a farm and sees cruelty.
Thank you. That concludes the time for the government. We'll now turn to the official opposition. You have 4 minutes. MPP Glover, you have the floor.
Yeah, the first thing I just want to comment on something that happened in earlier round of questioning there. We heard MPP Smith was talking to Miranda, and he was asking a number of questions about PPE, and Miranda stated several times that she thought that all workers should be getting PPE, but MPP Smith ended with the comment that some workers are worthy and others are not, implying that she's arguing that some workers are worthy of having PPE and others are not. I think it needs to be corrected in the record that that was never what Miranda said. In fact, she said the opposite of that during the comments. And I just bring this up. I think, I know in the legislature, there's all kinds of debate that happens and some of it, but I think here we really do need to, we can agree or disagree with the people who are coming to speak. We can challenge the facts that they bring. We can challenge their perspective, but I think we need to respect what they're actually saying. The question that I have then is around biosecurity. So, and I'll direct my question to Camille. So the government is arguing that biosecurity is compromised if somebody comes trespassing onto a farm because they could bring contaminants into that space. And on the other side, you're arguing that biosecurity could be compromised if unsanitary conditions in food processing are not addressed or not exposed. Can you just comment on these two conflicting concerns around biosecurity?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Glover. I don't see anything in this bill that addresses a problem with biosecurity. The bill addresses trespass, which is already an offense, and then it targets whistleblowers. So, addressing trespass, I'm not going to say that's not a legitimate purpose, but those offenses already exist. But when we talk about addressing whistleblowers, these are people who are trained to be farm employees. They follow all the protocols just as any other staff does. And the government hasn't presented any rationale for why they would pose a particular biosecurity risk such that they should be prosecuted and fined massive amounts of money. I would say this bill is quite unlike some other so-called ag gag legislation that we've seen that actually does refer specifically to biosecurity. So there's a piece of legislation, a private member's bill in British Columbia that addresses this more on point. There's actually a federal bill proposed by the conservative agriculture critic that's very specific to introducing a biosecurity risk to animals. And that's quite unlike what we're seeing in Bill 156. So to me, when you look at Bill 156, it's couched in the language of trespass and biosecurity.
You have 1 minute
left. But I think
what
its true purpose is to target whistleblowers who might expose those biosecurity concerns. And that's important. Biosecurity is something that whistleblowers could expose if they see concerns. It's the kind of thing where if somebody's working in a facility and say we're talking about a biosecurity concern or a health and safety concern for workers, like the 1,000+ workers who got sick at the Cargill slaughterhouse in Alberta. This is something that we should be relying on whistleblowers to come forward for without fear of prosecution.
Okay, thank you. I think we're almost out of time. Thank you all for being here and for your presentations.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank all the presenters for coming here today and speaking with us and answering the committee's questions. I'd also like to thank the committee for their cooperation as we operate through Zoom. At this point in time, presenters, you may step down, and the committee is in recess until 1 p.m. Thank you.